Maybe to Scott or Amalesh, how do you define the magnitude of the disturbance that might be caused by a particular energy system, whether that be conventional or renewable? Perhaps starting with Scott.
Okay, I guess there are many different ways to measure that. Like if you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, you quantify the amount of greenhouse gas being emitted. You can compare that among different energy production systems, compare between conventional versus renewable, as Amalesh has done. So there are different ways to quantify that. And you can quantify the amount of area that was disturbed. You can quantify the degree of the disturbance. So different disturbance obviously will require different assessment as to the degree of disturbance.
Sounds good. Amalesh, in the renewable space, what do you have some insights on this? In particular, those energy systems are a little bit different. Thinking about the scale of the impact, you discussed solar and wind, which have considerable footprints on the landscape, and also maybe the duration of the impacts of these energy systems as you deploy them on the landscape.
Actually, it's depends on the target or prospect of the energy system. For example, if you go for solar energy system, so what is the target? It's for only one time up to 25 years, because this the life cycle for one set of solar and panel is around 25 to 30 years or something this range. So in that point of view, if you look at all the point, it's clearly shows that the overall impact from the all three renewable energy system is very low compared to the conventional energy system. But and then the impact what we found, it's if we want to mitigate those factors, still we have some tools and the process already out there that can applicable to reduce those environmental impact and all this part. So
thank you. That's a perfect segue. I'm actually going to pass it to Danny with that. So just I guess a general question, whether it be conventional or unconventional, we have a land disturbance that's caused by one of these energy systems. In your line of work, what kind of things do you look at to define the magnitude or the sort of effort or energy or cost, financial costs that would go into reclaiming a landscape?
I think that is broadly almost dictated by the regulations, because it goes back to what do you want to reclaim it back to and what are the regs. And certainly I think in Alberta we do have some of the strictest regulations when it comes to reclamation standards. So I think, the cost and the effort that you put into reclamation will be largely defined by the policies and the standards. Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on I guess what's the definition of reclaimed? I know this gets tossed around a lot, and at least three of you are in renewable resources. So I'm curious how you define reclaimed, and I'd add to that, if you want to chat about it, who should get to define what it is? Is that the government or the university or some sort of sharing? I guess that's a bit of a softer question, but it's one of the speakers audience members is curious about it.
That's a good question. I think the definition of reclaimed or reclamation, I guess recovery or whatever you want to call it, it's all defined by the policies that dictates the outcome. So and right now it's the Alberta Energy Regulator. They enforce the regs, and the policymakers from Alberta Environment makes up the regulations, and the Energy Regulator will enforce it. So they do seek input from researchers and the scientific community, but largely it's driven by a lot of these policymakers.
And I guess to add to that, in Alberta, we have the so-called, I guess it was mentioning on one of the slides that I presented, that you need to get the reclamation certificate. I think that's the stamp where it says you are fully reclaimed. But the caveat there is also that if there's any problem develops down the road, even though you have the reclamation certificate, if there's problem developing down the road, like contaminations still occurring, seepage water that's still toxic and so forth, you still have to address them, that you can't really walk away from that site.
Right. Sylvia, are these things weighted in LCA analyses then? Is there a way of including the regulatory regime in which you're operating in a particular energy system?
Yeah, well, I think you would be looking at the potential, like modeling the impacts of your current activities. So that would account for whatever that regulatory system is. I think in terms of looking at impacts outside of greenhouse gas emissions, it can be a lot more complicated to do in an LCA, and there's progress being made there, but definitely still the focus is on greenhouse gas emissions specifically.